Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Love of Business Show at prconnectionsradio.com, the voice of new media. My name is Guy Dawson, and I am the managing member of Classy Communications, a full-service public relations and advertising company. And I am here with a man who I have known for many years, Tiger Todd, with Heroes Incorporated, and he is going to talk about his love of business with us today. Yes. Welcome, Tiger Todd.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And I can't remember exactly when I met you. It was some type of an event, and you were doing speaking, which is something that you have been doing for many years. And then I recently reconnected with you at another speaking engagement. I guess speaking is definitely something within your business that brings you love that's how I keep running into you.
Yeah, I don't know that it's the speaking as much as the ability to help people get over their hurdles. Interesting. I discovered that I could do that, right? You know, you almost have to throw yourself into a different setting in order to discover if you have, an ability instead of measure it based on self-image if you don't think you can. And mine was walking into a gym. I had volunteered for a school district program. And I actually walked into a gym thinking I was going to have 30 kids, and it was 400. And something just came over me to deliver, and the impact of, I was going to say those, not just those kids, but their teachers. By the time I got done, I recognized something in me I didn't know that was there. And I don't know that we create that. I think it's either you're channeling something or you're blessed with something. But yeah, ever since that moment, I found that it is something that makes me feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
How long have you been an entrepreneur, Tiger Todd?
Well, I'm going to say when I was 9 years old, but that was working for my dad, who had a small business here in Las Vegas. But I started my first business when I was 19. It was a small sound system business in Walla Walla, Washington, where I went to college. And I did it while I was in college. And so that's probably when it started. Yeah.
And what attracted you to entrepreneurship? I mean, obviously, I guess it's kind of in your genes with your dad having a business. Is that kind of how it was for you, watching your dad and helping your dad, and then ultimately striking out on your own and creating a business?
That's a great question. And I think now that as I look back, right, as I now have annular rings, right, when you get this old, you look at the fires, you look at, you can check the history. As I look back on the history of this, I think, when I was young, I just didn't know any better. So I think what it is if you've had entrepreneur, training or impartation, I think is more accurate if you're human. As I had this as a child, what happens is you don't know you can't. So it's not so much a conscious decision, it's an expression of something that has been imparted in you. So I just, when something was needed and I couldn't find it somewhere else, I didn't think that why not me not do it. So I just did it.
I can appreciate that. I started in entrepreneurship at 11, 12 years old, and that I've never actually heard it said in that way before, but it's true. And I don't come from an entrepreneurial background, but when I got started in business and I started making money, I never thought of it, that it couldn't work. That's an excellent perspective on that.
Yeah, well, as when I had to founding Hero School in my philanthropy initially, it had me reverse engineer a lot of these things in life. And it's odd. We, in one of the things, getting 40, 50,000 homeless people off the streets, we taught a class called the 7 Steps to the Job You Want. And invariably every week when I taught this course, I'd have a CEO or a business owner who'd sit in on it. Now, keep in mind, they're doing it. They were probably better at operating businesses than I ever was. And yet they had not reverse engineered that, oh my God, that is how I think about it. Oh my God, that is. So yeah, I think most of my new career path is to look back and reverse engineer what makes up the entrepreneur that simply can't be described by a Harvard or a Stanford. Because they're in a protected environment that, they'll often confuse management with leadership. They won't put an adjective to know what kind of leadership is it, right? So, they're missing out on what you and I know, but we don't necessarily we can't spell it out or quantify it, because we're just in the middle of doing it. But yeah, we know stuff that we know.
And there was a great point we were talking before we came on air today, Todd, about the instinctive aspect of entrepreneurship, and that some people really are, and I don't think it's the majority of people, by the way, who start businesses are entrepreneurs. I think the majority of people who start businesses, and the way you phrased it was, they just don't want to work for someone else, and so there is a difference, and maybe you could describe that difference between someone who is truly an entrepreneur and someone who maybe becomes an entrepreneur, but their initial goal was not the instinctive element of entrepreneurship that you just touched on a second ago.
There's one thing that, I think most business owners know this when they have to become employers, right? It's not just a one-off thing. You now have to delegate, for example, but many times it's abdicate, right? If you don't have the skill set, right? You don't hand off something to somebody, you actually leave it for somebody and you move on. And so I think the same is true with entrepreneurs that, quote, become small business owners or they start something because they are trying to escape having to do what someone else says. Again, if I had $1 for every one of the homeless people I'd worked with that told me that they were entrepreneurs, and the first question I asked them, I said, well, who are your customers? Right? Because if you don't have a customer, you're not, right? The second thing is the actual definition of an entrepreneur, right? From the French word to risk one's own, right? And if you haven't risked your own money, time, courage, reputation, all that, then by definition, you're not an entrepreneur. You might be a business owner, right? You might be a startup, right? But entrepreneur, you can't have an angel investor and be an entrepreneur, even if everyone in the media describes it that way by definition, right? So here's what I've kind of learned going back to this. I think there are two types. If we were to say, and we teach this like in my new rapid reinvention course, if we were talking about a larger corporation, a larger company, you definitely have 4 types of people on a functional team based on innate, intrinsic strengths. So you have the creative idea people. These would be the natural problem solvers, but they're channels for something that's new. So they rarely get anything done because they're always talking about what they should do. Then you have to have the people that organize and prioritize. And these 2 types, this is the kid in the cul-de-sac who has the great arm that wants to just throw the football, and he needs someone who loves to catch, not someone else who loves to throw, right? So these 2 become a complementary pair, and most businesses, most of the entrepreneurships start with the first one, the one with the creative idea. But again, this person doesn't necessarily finish things very well, not really great at the details, certainly can't look for threats, right? So the second person, who doesn't have a creative bone in their body, but totally respects all these 1,000 ideas a week, this one's superpower is the ability to organize and prioritize, to pick from the 1,000, the 3 most actionable, business ideas. So these are the 2, I think we'll call them natural entrepreneurs. And what happens is, and at least the course of 40 years of this with me, is I see that in an earlier generation, most small businesses were the first type. And then the ones that took those and turned small businesses into Best Buy and turned them into something much larger was the second type. Now, ideally, these 2 types should work together. I even have a list here, if I can share from one of my courses, because the 2 working together are very famous, right? It's the 2 Steves with Apple. Right? It was literally, but you had to have the idea person and then the get things done person. So I think the same with the 2 that founded Home Depot. Right? Today, here's where it's different. One of the things I lacked, totally missing in my entrepreneur journey, is I never worked for a larger company. So that is a kind of education I'm not sure you can get externally. Because again, even if you took that, business or economics course at Harvard or Stanford or USC, your first job is still going to be working for a large company where you can be in the middle of it and kind of see where all the different departments, are. And many small business owners are hamstrung by the inability to understand the big scope of scale. So in other words, they get to just a certain level, and that's the only level they can maintain. And if the world changes, they tend to even start to reduce their viability. So yeah, I would say there's the intrinsic types. Of the other two personality types, they don't make good entrepreneurs. Those are the ones that, I call it the devil's advocates. They have a superpower for finding out what's wrong with something, right? And if you, Best Buy, you want to put that person in accounting, right, or in loss prevention. But if you put them on the sales floor, right, they become the sales prevention department. You're right, and that's no good if you're an entrepreneur. You obviously, sales solves everything. And then finally, the detail-oriented person, they don't know when to stop, and they're kind of waiting for a task list, right? So if this person works for somebody else and says, well, I'm tired of working for somebody else, I want to start my own business, they don't have the gene of initiative, right? So they won't be a starter. They won't know even where to start. They're waiting for someone to tell them what to do. So again, all four together make a perfect small business. But most of them were started by the first personality type. Most of them were scaled by the second type. And then the others, as a team, keep that business viable through each season, through the pandemic.
You're describing a lot there, Tiger Todd, is leadership in business and the understanding of that when you're building teams. I mean, that is... that understanding those components that you just talked about when you're in the development stage of your business, or making sure that you have the right people in the right places, is so important. And it's also a great point that you brought up about seeing a lot of people, as I have, start businesses throughout my lifetime, and them not being able to, no matter how badly they wanted to be an entrepreneur, just because they did not have the skill sets that are necessary in order to be able to make it happen, to see some of the frustration that they go through because they don't have the initiative, and they haven't figured out how to get the initiative, and they're like spinning constantly trying to make it work. Is there a way for them to rewire themselves to be able to develop the skills to make it all work? What are your thoughts about that?
I think there is, but and this could go back to a nature nurture argument. And yet I think for me, problems are solved. 90% of every problem is solved with awareness, right? And as is now a common phrase, we don't know what we don't know. So we can go a long way into at least laying out a template. And this is, I guess, my last now 20 years is being more a business philosopher than someone who's actually, who's, spending the time running the business. And the idea is, look, I see it's the lack of knowing even where to start, right? Because if you lack skills, you still need to know what skills you lack and where to go to get them, right? And let's suppose you're coming out of a school, your scholarship was paid for, everything's paid for. You're probably going to go into entrepreneurship thinking you shouldn't have to pay for everything. So you're looking for everything free. I mean, literally, we have a generation of people taught through school that they don't need to pay their student loans. So which means they're not going to invest in their own business. They're looking for someone else's money. Right. And this is a mindset issue, which means they're going to try to build their small business on YouTube. And while you can get information on YouTube, you can't get impartation. Right. So it was 2002 that I, formally created a school of psychology around this, because I think I saw it missing in community work and philanthropy. But then over time, when people make 10x results investing in something, Google goes public, a bunch of people become millionaires, right? That now gives a new perception of what a small business is, or what business is, entrepreneurship. And it's a false impression, except for a small percentage of people. So to combat that, right, to restore that, or not to watch so many, here's where my biggest pain is. My pain is driving through a neighborhood with shopping centers and holes in the front fascia where somebody's sign used to be
Mm.
because that business didn't make it. And that's because I'm still tied, I think, to my very first business and all that I put in it to get that thing to become alive. And a small business from my philosophy, right? If me growing up, right? It's not necessarily accurate fully today, but that's a person's life, and it creates a living thing like a baby. And so it's heartbreaking to me because, again, it's a death of a living thing when I see someone, losing their sign, which stood for this brand, more than that, this living thing. So the philosophy is this: look, we become what we learn. And again, I've established this, through TED Talks, through all these things, because it's missing that human beings are unique to the planet in that we become what we learn. So back to your skills question. You can learn something for a skill, but you have to learn it from someone who can impart it. If I haven't first mastered engineering, for example, I can't impart engineering to you to where you could become an engineer, right? If I've only mastered accounting, the most you can be listening to me is an accountant, right? So when it comes to the skills, you have to have the awareness, and you have to find the right people who have the power to be able to impart that to you. But yeah, I believe you can change just like people can change in engineers. The university system's built on that very premise.
Yeah, who do you listen to? There's so much information that is being shared out there by people who have never run a business, know nothing about running a business coaches who've never run a business.
And to your point, maybe we just call them money multipliers, right? Because they're making a bunch of money from views. Who thought that you could make money by being an Instagram model, right? Who thought that just because I have all these followers who watched and loved my 20-second video of wrecking on a skateboard is now an economic model, right? So it's a business.
It's
right?
Great for them. Oh, don't get me wrong.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the thing. But
wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, you as the entrepreneur, if you're learning from someone who doesn't really know how to run a business, that's with a lot of people who get started in business. It's the people that are mentoring them, teaching them how to be in. Although, and far be it from they don't mind money in business, because as you know, business is difficult. I mean, it's not the easiest thing in the world. I'm concerned for people who are out there trying to learn business from people who may not be able to give them the best advice in order to be successful.
And what would you tell them, right? You have this experience, right? You're an expert in this. So what would you tell them? What's the first thing you would tell a small business owner or somebody going into a business, and especially if they're struggling or if they don't know where to start? What's something you would share with them?
I would tell them to do their best to find someone who's successful in business and to mimic. I mean, I have a man who's been mentoring me for 13 or 14 years.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been an entrepreneur since a long time.
Yeah.
But he's a very successful business person who's made a lot of money and been very, very successful. So I want to learn from
So that's the first step, right? And then you had to figure out what you had to do or how you needed to communicate in order to get that person to help you, right?
How to figure it out? You ask.
Yeah.
You have to ask. You have to not be afraid, and you have to be teachable enough when they're trying to tell you something, right? Yeah. Because that's he wouldn't be working with me for all these years. I mean, I wasn't a millionaire when I went, right, and got together with him. I was just getting my business started at that time. I mean, I've been in and out of business endeavors throughout my life, made money, how it's cool for us. And so I've had many, many, many experiences running in business. But this guy, I mean, I knew he knew what he was talking about, and I had to humble myself enough to had to say I could maintain the relationship. People like that, they're not going to be very patient with you. Listen, they're busy and they have a lot. Yeah. If they're in the time, if they're willing to do that and not charge you, and he didn't charge me, you're lucky if you can find someone like that, by the way.
Right. It reminds me of Anthony Hopkins, Antonio Banderas, and The Mask of Zorro. It's kind of that relationship where you have the master Zorro, right? But he didn't get into this to be a teacher, but he's got a bigger purpose. And if you're going to want his or her ability to transform you, then he or she wants to make sure you also carry on that purpose. And it's interesting, right? And so maybe the question, if you're looking for a good mentor, is find out what their purpose is and see if it's aligned with yours, or maybe it gives you purpose, right? Especially if you're young. And that might be a couple good steps you could, give someone.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, if your missions aren't in alignment, it's difficult to have that type of, because I've had experiences like that before. Yeah. Definitely your purposes, missions, and a lot of your basic principles about life definitely need to be in alignment for that to be a constructive relationship for both of you, because the mentor gets a lot out of that relation. They learn a lot about themselves, and I know that because I mentor a lot of people myself in business now. And I didn't realize how much he's actually getting in terms of growth and understanding about being a businessman from the mentorship relationship.
Well, and that brings up, I think, there's a Bible verse that says, when the blind lead the blind, they both fall in the ditch, right? So back to listening to people who are just players, but they're not coaches or team owners, right? And that's the first part. But the second half is, if what you sow is what you reap, then those business owners who need a mentor definitely have something that they already do well. And they should at least start to sow that. In other words, help somebody at a level below them. And they'll probably learn, right? As you said, they'll probably learn better how they can be better students to the mentor they need.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Helping others, business is all about service. I figured that out as a kid. Yeah. And business is more about service than anything else. And it's in service has a lot of different meanings and a lot of different levels. Yeah. You've served as a business. The people who are the best in business, and I want you to share about this as well, is they tend to be very, very service oriented. They just naturally understand. They know that they make money by being of tremendous service to people. And so they focus a lot on that. What do you think about that?
Well, I think I've learned over time that that's two categories, right? Because as looking back at this conversation, right, I've had my hard-headed years. and yet in my hard-headedness, it's like when people say, and I remember there's people telling me this 20 years ago, are you a leader? And I said, I don't know. And they said, well, do you have followers? And yet, this is one of the misconceptions that's just been promulgated through scale. And that scale includes the Harvard Business Review, right? Again, these are not problem solvers. These are people who take what is, right, and distribute it. So you have to find out. Problem solvers is the woman that owns 4 sports bars. She solves 400 more problems a week than the federal government has in 20 years, right? Because it's in her. So thinking from that standpoint, I had to create a model of I call it the leadership pyramid. And just by adding an adjective, you first have to discover what type of leader, right? Are you an organizational leader, right? And that's what most colleges produce, right? Is the person that can scale people. And then, and that's a superpower. It's actually one I don't have. So then there's the financial leader. That's the one that takes $1 in and multiplies that. Thank God for that person. And then through technology, we now have the scale leader who, it's the Zappos, right? The Tony Hsieh, who multiplies a product digitally to scale. But on the early left-hand, corner of this pyramid is the transformational leader. And if you think about that, this is the pioneer, right? This is the person who has the solution, but they might suck with people, suck at multiplying money, and suck at scale. But they have the one solution that should be scaled and funded and multiplied out there or distributed by a host of people or an HR department, right? So we have to see that all 4 of those should work together. And so back to your question, I think that there are some leaders like Leonardo da Vinci. There are some leaders like Sir Isaac Newton that didn't have any followers, right? There are people like an Albert Einstein that led in a science and it wasn't proven for 93 years. So I think there has to be a new re-education of the population, so they don't just say, well, if you don't have followers, or you're not good just with people, or you're not just good scaling this, then it's an irrelevant subject. You're going to end up with a generation of no solutions. So yes, I think that you have to qualify which type of leader, which type of person that is. Certainly, if you have a solution, you need to pair yourself with someone that can actually operate the business in order to distribute that solution. You can't. I don't know that you can cross over those two types, or I call them animal spirits, right? Because they're instinctive. They're in you.
Todd, tell us how you help people with Heroes Incorporated.
So Heroes Incorporated uses the Hero School model, which is an accelerated learning engine, to be able to deliver a, if you will, transformative education very quickly. We call it real life change at the speed of movies. So in the 90s, I reverse engineered math from the movies for a human change, a universal formula for human change, right? It's not the universal formula for energy, right? Which everyone knows as E equals MC squared, but it is one for transformation of a human being. And I applied it first to homeless people. So they're in one state. And then shortly after a Hero School model, they came out as someone different. They came out as marine biologists. They came out as security guards. They came out of it as a manager at the Venetian, right? They changed, a transformation of character. So Heroes Inc. delivers that to help people that are on the front lines of nursing, education, teachers, police officers, those people struggling in LA with, if you will, maybe an ineffective model at dealing, like, say, with crises like homelessness, right? The more they do, the more money they get, the more it grows. Right? We got to go back and say, maybe we're not starting with the right solution. Maybe we're scaling something. Anyway, solve the problem first, I think, is another Einstein quote, right? If I had just an hour to save the world, I'd spend the first 55 minutes discovering, identifying the actual problem, and then 5 minutes solving it. So anyway, the Heroes Inc. We've now obviously had to pivot the distribution to something that's online. And for years, I didn't believe it was possible to create that 2-hour transformation effect. And so, I'm satisfied that it's now about 2 weeks, which is better than 20 years. So yeah, it's accelerated learning model. That's what Heroes Inc. does.
Yeah, powerful platform. I know you've helped a lot of people with it through the years. And how does the development of this concept lend to your love of business, which is what this podcast is all about?
Well, I think, and I noticed it while, pandemic, what does the entrepreneur do? They create. And, but if you've been in business a while and you're just overwhelmed by the burdens of all of the forces asking something of you, right, then you don't get to live from the core, if you will, of your inner entrepreneur, right, and create. And so it became a new project. And as brutal as it was, right, because, as you get older, you don't want to learn something new. And so it became a wake-up call to, you also have to practice what you preach, right? If I want other people to change, I do too. So anyways, it really birthed this new awakening and a new way to reach more people than we could before. And we had 1,241 different Hero School modules. 4 of those comprise a course. And now it becomes fun to say, oh, we got the first 4 of them done. That we got, 1,236 left to go. So anyway, now it's very exciting. And so again, if someone's stuck, throw yourself into some new learning.
Tiger Todd, if there was a word of advice or a tip that you could give anyone to gain greater love for their business, what would it be?
Oh, I would just, if there's a word, maybe a sentence of advice, I would just say that you're you for a reason, right? You may not be all that's necessary in the moment, but you're still you. And the moment you take responsibility for you and you have what I call a now moment, right? What do I have to work with now, right? Which touches gratitude instead of complaints, right? Because again, when you're overburdened or you're losing something, you haven't had income in 6 months, right? This is a big deal. But to have a now moment, recognize that, well, I still have, okay, I have 10 more, 10 more days of cash flow, right? I have, this much money in the bank. I still have a vehicle until the end of the month. I still have, oh my God, I have insurance. What can I do with that now? That puts you back into the chair of being in charge of your business, your life, and your future.
Mm-hmm. Staying in the day in business, Tiger, that's something great can be right around the corner. I mean, I've had
That's probably a
so
better
many
word.
experiences
Yeah.
where I've thought, oh man, how am I going to, but like you said, you just keep working for today. And then all of a sudden the deal comes, the phone call comes, somebody wants to give you some money right away. A committed entrepreneur, business owner has a way of attracting it from the
Yeah.
will support your continuance of the mission.
Yeah. So true. So true. Yeah.
So
But
many times I've experienced that. Staying in the day, one day at a time, Mr. or Mrs. Entrepreneur out there.
right. And when you're overwhelmed with too many thoughts, I just tell myself, don't think, just do. Right. There's a philosophy of inaction when you're halt between two opinions. And now, as you know, with so much noise in the airwaves of what someone should do, the advice, don't think, just do, means you're going to operate only in the philosophy you know, only with the first thing in front of you that needs to be done, whether that's the dishes or the newsletter to your customers. Don't think, just do, just work on the one thing. And like you said, these other things will either start to take care of themselves or the next steps will unfold. And that's the core. I don't think you're going to be an entrepreneur without some faith.
Yes, overcoming what you were talking about, the paralysis of analysis. Right. Can be something that can really stifle you as an entrepreneur. And it's because you've got so many things you're thinking about and you can overthink it. Can't you, Tiger? You can overthink entrepreneurship and make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah. And just because you can't do the one big, great thing that only you can do, you still have to accept that, in reality, let's still first do the portion of that somebody does want. Right. And see someone through, I think what Brendan Burchard calls an ambition line, and in the old days, right, if they said, well, I don't really want this. I said, okay, I know the solution to, say, this educational problem. And yet they can't handle that solution. Right. But the first thing that they're fighting with, I can take care of that for them. And so not to be afraid to downshift to meet them where they're at. And then build and work with them over time to get them to a place where they can understand and then accept the one thing that will end them repeating history from now on.
Yeah,
a lesson that took me 15 years to recognize.
Yeah, we're all on our own journey of discovery and understanding, and that's one of the great things about business. I think, Todd, is that you're never going to figure it out. It's like the never-ending puzzle. You look at a puzzle, and a puzzle, eventually you have four corners. It's kind of my visual that I like to share with people about what a business is. It's like a never-ending puzzle going in four directions. And the beautiful thing about that is, yes, you're going to keep putting pieces in the wrong spot, just like you would if you were building a puzzle, but just stick with it. And you're committed to your own personal growth, and you're teachable. And I like to really emphasize that. You'll continue to be able to put those pieces into the puzzle and stay in business and provide a great service for someone.
Yeah. My seal of approval. Absolutely.
Yeah. How can people get in contact with you to hear you as a speaker or get some of your business philosophy? I love that phrase that you were talking about earlier.
So, we have one portal for the Hero School learning engine philosophy psychology, and that's heroschool.us, HEROSCHOOL.us. And then from there are links to the different, divisions or licensees of the technology. So heroschool.us.
Well, thanks again for stopping by, Tiger Todd. It's always a pleasure when I connect with you. And I want you to know that in interviewing you, you made me a smarter business person today. And I always appreciate being around people who appreciate business and who have a love. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show today.
Well, I appreciate it very much. And of course, really appreciate the work you do. It's more essential now than ever. So thank you, Guy.
Yes, we've all got to pull together with our collective loves of business during some interesting times to keep each other going. Business is at the core of any society, the success of entrepreneurial endeavors and business ownership. And so that's what we're doing here with the Love of Business, continuing to support pillars of our society. And one of them is definitely business ownership. So thanks again, Tiger Todd, for stopping by, and thank all of you for tuning into the Love of Business. Tune for our next broadcast. It's going to be in 1 week with Maria Faith, and we're going to announce her guest on Facebook very soon. Take care of yourselves.